Recording.
Right, friends. Good evening.
Good evening.
Hope everyone is well this evening.
Yeah, I am. Don't worry.
You must be mad at me.
Tonight we're going to be undertaking.
Says it's connected.
Yeah, we're connected. I'm just going to mute everybody so that so we minimize background noise. But again, as always, please feel free to unmute yourself to ask a question or to raise your hand, with the clicky thing, so that I can know that you want to ask something. I hope everyone is well tonight. We're going to be doing how to kasher your kitchen for Pesach without going crazy. There is no mitzvah of making yourself nuts before Pesach. There is definitely a sense of the importance of kashering for Pesach, right? That the prohibition of chametz is something which is strangely out of place. It's not really, it doesn't really fit neatly into the categories of kashrut. It's not really about what's permissible and not permissible to eat, like other areas of kashrut. If it were, it would not be chiyuv karet. We have this idea that there are certain mitzvot which come with a more severe penalty. A standard penalty for any mitzvah lo taseh, thou shalt not, is that it comes with a if you are properly warned and witnessed, and people come and testify in the Beit Din that that they warned you and told you that what you're doing is prohibited, and that nevertheless you wantonly went and did it. So the general punishment is that you receive a beating, right? The Torah prescribes lashes for the wanton sinner. However, there are certain mitzvot which carry with them a more severe penalty of what's known as karet. Karet has the sense of being cut off, being excised. The way that it's described in the Torah is that soul shall be lost from its people. It's quite a strong phrasing, right? The idea that as if there's a limb of the body which is being amputated, right? That when a person is lost from the people. But the sense that comes with karet is that this is something so integrated, something so integral to a person's Jewishness or Jewish identity, that if they've lost it, that they're sort of their soul has been cut off from the rest of the souls, right? That they're so alienated from their Jewishness that they would wantonly do such a thing. And the mitzvah of not eating chametz comes with this kind of a prohibition that if you violate it wantonly, it's chayav karet, and that usually that's quite a severe penalty. So why is chametz so bad? And the long answer is we'll skip for now, but the short answer is that it really is actually part of the laws of idolatry, and that chametz as a concept is an idolatrous sense, that there's something which is going to make another power, right, other than God, in the sense of that there is a microorganism at work here, and if you can imagine people sort of worshiping the God that makes the dough rise, as opposed to Hashem. And so the sense of the leaving of Egypt is the departing from idolatry, and that a person who's clinging to chametz on Pesach it's akin to a category of idolatry, and that's how it's regarded, and that a person who will wantonly go out of their way to eat chametz on Pesach is really so. It's such an in-your-face kind of thing of I don't want to be free. I don't want to be a Jewish person. I would rather be a slave to Pharaoh in Egypt. That sense of choosing to be enslaved is the essence of idolatry, right? I would rather be a slave, or I'm going to enslave myself to some other power other than God. That's bordering on idolatrous. Sylvia, yes.
I just have a question. So how is that law seen like nowadays? Because in terms of people being like their soul being cut off if they wantingly eat the hametz during Pesach. Because I mean, we know a lot of Jews do eat hametz during Pesach, and so does that mean like? But I don't think that would mean their souls. I'm not saying that I'm condoning it or that I'm going to do it, but I'm just saying like people who do that. I don't know. It seems very harsh. That's what I mean.
Yeah. So the question that we really the core of the question on a practical level is what defines wanton, wantonly. And halakhically speaking, unless there are somebody there at the point saying to the person, that this is prohibited and that this is a chiyuv karet, and that if you do this, your soul will be cut off, and that this is a category of idolatry, right? And if they're not warned at the very moment by witnesses, so then it wouldn't fall into that category, right? Then it would sort of still be in the realm of the accidental. Nevertheless, the lesson that it's trying to tell us that a person who, not for lack of knowledge, but for a person who bedavka, right, out of anger, out of spite, wants to stick it to God, saying, I'm not into this Jewish stuff. I don't want to do Torah. I don't want to keep Pesach. I want to, right, I want to cast myself away from all those people who are keeping Pesach. There is a certain wantonness to it, which bespeaks the sense of I'm not with them. And so it's hard to, on the one hand, we're not going to say that a person who's eaten chametz is we don't excommunicate people today for eating chametz. We don't say that you're no longer welcome in shul, but the sense of it does bespeak a certain alienation from the Jewish people if you're going out of your way to eat chametz on Pesach, bedavka as a statement of I'm not into that Jewish thing. Right. And again, someone who doesn't know better is obviously not in the category of wantonness, right? But someone who does know and is doing it from spite, I think that does bespeak a sort of a very strong sense of alienation from the Jewish people. That is kind of what we're saying when that soul is lost from the people, right? Yeah.
So maybe somebody who knows that you're not supposed to, but they're not. But there's not somebody there saying, well, if you eat it, your soul's going to be cut off. Like they kind of know, oh, well, you're not supposed to eat hametz, but I just people who don't observe things in general, but they're not doing it out of spite. Then it's not the same level.
Right. It's not the same level. And today in our world, we don't have any practical application for things which have chayv karet. Right, we don't excommunicate people and ostracize people from our community. There probably are people, there are communities, and that if they know that you've done this on purpose, would not want you to come to their shul, perhaps. But it's certainly not the case at our shul. But I think it can't be understated, though, the seriousness of this, right? That a person who's going to say, I am choosing to not leave Egypt, right? I'm choosing, I don't want to be part of this liberation process. I don't want to be part of the Jewish people. I would rather stay a slave to Pharaoh in Egypt. If that's really the statement that you're making, that's very sad, a very sad state of affairs. And I think it really does hit that idolatrous sense of I would rather be a slave to somebody else than free to serve Hashem. And that's antithetical to what Pesach is all about. Okay, so without further ado, I want to get us going. You should shortly be able to see this is an excerpt. This is a chapter from the book The Kosher Kitchen, for those that are in the conversion track. Come on, open up. And in general, when we get in this class to dealing with Kasher, this is going to be the book that we're going to use. Come on, no, open up. My apologies, I'm having technical difficulties. I'm not sure why I can't see this. Why isn't this opening? I'm sorry, I'm a little confused why my computer is not opening this.
Hey, Rabbi,
Yeah,
you know what I would try? I tried closing your drive and then maybe try opening your drive again, like in a new tab or something. That might do the trick. It might just be glitching out.
yeah, let's try and reboot it. Try refreshing the page. We're working on that. I'm not sure, honey. No. Okay, maybe this is just not how Hashem wants us to do this. Let's try closing this. Okay. Try it again. Again, my apologies. Let's start with some basic concepts, okay? The main idea behind kasher and kashering anything in general, including for Pesach, is in the manner that something became treif or became chametz, so that's the same way that it needs to be kashered from. Which means that if you have, for example, a surface which handles chametz cold, it's sufficient to clean it cold. If it handles chametz hot, then I need to clean it, I need to kasher it using the same degree of heat. If it handles chametz in water as liquids, so I need to kasher it with liquids, and if it handles it by direct contact with solid food, so in theory that should be the same means to kasher it. So the big thing that everybody goes nuts about, you may have to download the PDF. Yeah, that would make sense. Oh, here we go. Okay, 1 second. Push that button. Okay, as we just wait for things to come. Again, I'm very, very sorry for the delay. But the idea is very simple. If something doesn't touch hot food, it doesn't need to be kashered with hot water. That means if you are not in the habit of putting hot chametz, like hot pizza, right onto your countertop, or kneading challah dough, right? If you're making your challah and you're kneading it on the countertop, but it's not hot, so you don't need to use hot water to kasher your countertops. And this is something that many people I've seen, go crazy with, that you don't have to. You don't really need to even cover your countertops if they don't handle hot food. If you use cutting boards or you don't put food directly from the stove, not even on the pot. I'm saying like the food itself directly on the counter. So you don't need to kasher your countertops. And that saves people a huge amount of trouble. And you don't need to cover your countertops. You don't need to foil your entire kitchen. You see people with kitchens that look like they're from the space shuttle. And that's completely unnecessary. Now, in this book, he comes and he does sort of, he suggests that people do put things like pizza or hot food directly onto the countertop. So if you know that you do that, so you do need to handle the countertops. Here we go. Share the screen. He seems to be of this opinion. The countertops come into contact with hot foods and liquids. That's not what we do in my kitchen. So I don't see any reason that we need to do this. Now, if you know that you happen to put hot food directly on the surface, then it does need to be kosher. And the best way to do it, right, is irui mikli rishon. You should take water from boil water in your, if you have an electric kettle, right? And then you just pour it over the countertop. That's sufficient. I've seen people that do it even more, that they think that that's not enough, right? That they don't use this even meluban, a hot rock, or even an iron. I've seen people that take, get their countertop nice and wet, and then they take the hot iron and go over it so as to boil the water on the countertop. If you know that you happen to put, hot food, right? If I had a big, let's say I was making a big brisket, right? A big brisket, and I knew that I had beer in my sauce. So I've got a real chametz brisket, and it's a big piece of meat, and it's very hot, and I take it right from the oven, I put it straight on the countertop, and now I've got boiling hot beer on my countertop. Now I really have to kosher that countertop. Okay, then I really have to kosher it properly, and then I got to come with the hot water. But short of that, that seems to me a far-fetched kind of a situation. And then most of us don't put hot food directly on the countertop. If we do, we maybe use a cutting board or something. So if you don't put hot food directly on your countertops, you don't need to kosher your countertops. It's sufficient to clean them so that there is no visible schmutz, no visible dirt, and even schmutz, which is not thick, right? Even if you have a discoloration, but when you scratch, right? If I come and I take my counter, right, and I'm here's right, and if I can scratch it with my fingernail, and it might be a different color, but there's no thickness to it, then it doesn't need to be removed. Meaning, if it's just a discoloration, you can treat it as just another color of the counter. But if you can feel it, if there's any thickness to it, that when you scratch it with your fingernail, you can feel it. So really, it should come off. It has some thickness to it. And if you can't scrub it off, or use like a scraper or something to scrape off any food, right? Any traces of food that have depth, you should do so. What's important to be able to know is that only food is chametz. Okay, chametz is not dirt. Chametz is not schmutz. It's not stains. If it's not food, it's not really chametz. If a dog wouldn't eat it, it isn't chametz. It's just dirt. Right? Dogs generally don't eat dirt. But if you have something like grease on the bottom of your oven, right, and if your dog would come and start licking it, because dogs like to lick grease, so that needs to be gotten rid of. Right, then it's considered food. But if it's not food, it's just discoloration or schmutz, it's not really chametz. And it's sufficient, therefore, for most things to destroy it as being food. Which means if you use something like bleach or a strong cleaner that is going to be something that even if it were food and it had touched that substance, you would not eat it. Right, so then it's sufficient that you've destroyed it from being food, and now the dog won't lick it, and therefore it's not really chametz anymore. And that's a very important concept that you can therefore it's sufficient to most spaces, most countertops, and shelves, and cupboards, and surfaces in the fridge, and anything that doesn't directly touch hot food is sufficient to wipe down with bleach, or with like a disinfectant spray or something of that sort. So that's sufficient for kosher most surfaces that don't touch hot food. So all of the insides of your shelves. I've seen people that come and they foil the inside of shelves, completely unnecessary. You don't need to foil, the backsplash and the stove. We'll get to the stove in just a minute. But surfaces that are not hot, right, that they don't actually touch the food in a hot way, are not going to absorb any flavor from the food. And even if chametz touched them, it's sufficient to just wipe it up. If it was cold, there's no absorption. And so therefore, to wipe things with a bleach or with one of these disinfectant sprays or your basic cleaning stuff, fantastic. I don't know what people use these days, but anything that's strong enough that you wouldn't want to eat it, right, that it would no longer be considered edible, is sufficient to destroy it as food, and therefore it's not chametz. And that's a very important thing that makes you not need to go crazy. Okay, so again, you can see here that he thinks that countertops do. I think countertops don't. If you know that your countertops do come in contact with hot food directly, you should kasher them. If you know that your countertops don't come into hot food directly, they don't need to be kashered. Okay, porcelain and enameled surfaces, generally we say cannot be kashered. And this is a problem if you have a porcelain or an enamel sink, right? And that becomes very difficult. There are those poskim who allow for it, but for the most part, generally people don't. And so if you have a stainless steel sink or stainless steel counters or anything which is stainless steel, so that can easily be kasher. But things which are porcelain or enamel are difficult and should, if possible, should be covered. Right? If you have a sink that's a porcelain or an enamel sink, it's good to use like a big rubber tub, to put a big tub in, to clean it thoroughly so that you can't see anything, but then not to do it. And the reason is like this: when it comes to the sink, I know we do this all the time. We cook some pasta and we take the boiling hot pasta water and we pour it, through the spaghetti strainer, and boiling hot chametz water touches our sink, and that makes our sink genuinely chametz. The sink therefore does need to be kasher, but because it was made chametz with hot water, it can be sufficient to kasher it with hot water. So I can again boil up my electric kettle, and then using the stream as it falls, where the stream should touch every area, right? So as I'm pouring, you need to make sure that the stream touches every area, so that it's not secondary, right? I don't want it. I can't kasher if it was made chametz with a direct flow of boiling hot water and not a secondary flow. So then it needs to be also kasher with a direct flow of boiling hot water. So to pour it in such a manner that you directly hit every spot with the stream is sufficient, and that's enough to kasher your sink if it's stainless steel or copper, or and any other surface which it comes into contact with boiling hot water, which is chametz, is sufficient to kasher with boiling hot water. That means before we get to the oven, let's just talk about pots. Is there a time frame? I don't put hot on my counters, but I live in a rental and I don't know what the people have done here before. That's a wonderful question. I don't know who the Zoom user is, but if you don't know, right, you have to ask how long has it been? Hi, Amanda. Thank you. If you don't know how long, you have to sort of figure. It's the same question. You can have the same question when you're dealing with, is it kosher, right? As you have to do with, is it chametz? If you're going to have food in direct contact with your countertops, chopping, let's say you're going to chop directly on the countertop, not using a cutting board. It's definitely ideal to use a cutting board. It saves you all kinds of trouble and saves you difficulty, and then you don't have problems of milchik and fleshik and whatever else you're doing. So I definitely recommend to people in general to use cutting boards, to have separate milchik and fleshik cutting boards and you should have, if you have plastic cutting boards, You should get new ones, for Pesach. Have a separate plastic cutting board for Pesach. If you have a wood one or bamboo, you can sand it very, very thoroughly, and that can be sufficient to have it be kosher. But it needs to be very, very well sanded such that you can no longer see the slash marks, right? The knife marks in it. So that if you have an electric sander, that's not hard to do, but it's quite labor intensive to sand a butcher block by hand. But it can be done. Cutting boards are usually more sanitary too. Yes, I fully agree. So again, countertops, unless you know that they come into direct contact with hot chametz, it's sufficient to wipe them down with bleach. The sink, we said, if you have a stainless steel sink, you should, again, pouring hot water is sufficient to kasher it, and you should also, just to be sure, pour hot water over the spout, right? The part that the water comes out, the faucet, and ideally also even over the hands, the knobs where you turn it, because oftentimes we'll touch them with hands that have been right, and they can still be hot, or hot water will splash onto them when you're pouring from this pasta water, any of those things. So ideally, any part of the sink complex, which is stainless steel, should be kosher with hot water. Pots and pans. Pots, he's going to skip to the oven, but let's see. We'll talk about the oven in just a moment. Let's see if we can find pots. If you have a big, here. Okay, that's not that. Okay, for pots and pans, it goes like this. If you have a pot which cooks with water, right? It's a big stock pot, and you want to make it kosher for Pesach. If it's purely metal, whether it's stainless steel or aluminum or copper, but it's purely metal and is not a composite material, doesn't have Teflon or any other non-stick coating, if it's cast iron, if it's purely metal, you can kasher it with water. You fill it full to the top with water until it boils over. And once it boils over the edge, it's now kosher. Now, ideally, you should not use it for 24 hours, right? Not use that pot for 24 hours. And then after 24 hours of unuse, you can do that, fill it up with water and let it boil over. And now it's kosher parv. And then you can, furthermore, you can then dump that water and refill it. It doesn't have to be filled to the top this time. And then anything you dunk in that water that's boiling is now kosher parv if it's metal, right? The metal can be koshered with boiling water. There is significant conversation about, significant conversation about if you can kosher plastic. In certain cases, when there's a lot of plastic, like in a restaurant situation where not koshering plastic is going to be, a huge thing. So there can be some leniencies, but generally we say plastic cannot be koshered, wood cannot be koshered if it's being used with hot water. Rubber cannot be koshered, and pottery cannot be koshered. But glass and metal can be koshered. And so if you have anything like that's glass or metal, or that the part which touches food, even if the whole thing is not. So like we have, for example, a vegetable peeler, right? The vegetable peeler, the handle and the sides are plastic, but the blades, right, are metal. That can be kosher. Here's someone's commented that Pyrex cannot be kosher. Correct. Pyrex is not glass. Pyrex is a polymer. It's a see-through polymer, but it's essentially plastic. Somebody says they want their deposit back. Always use cutting boards in a separate set of almost everything for Pesach. As long as it's all set aside each year, do I need to kosher it again? No. If you have things that are set aside for Pesach and you only use them for Pesach, you do not need to kosher them again. They can be relied upon to, if they've been in storage and not been used since last Pesach, you can take them out and keep things that are kosher for Pesach. That is definitely the best way to do it. Silas, yes.
Sorry, Rabbi. Thanks, Rabbi. Just wanted to linger on the metals that to be kashered in the pot. Is there any kind of like machloket around how much metal you can put in, or like can I just dump a bunch of my silverware in the water? Do I have to do that one at a time, or
You can
how
dump
do I?
it all in at once as long as it's fully submerged under the water. So you can, yes, you can dump in a whole thing of silverware and it'll all get koshered at once as long as it's fully submerged under the water. And you can do other pots in that manner, right? If I've got a great big pot, you can come. Now, I want to tell everybody, this is important. On Sunday, a week from today, Sunday, April 2nd, at Shari Tzedek, we have this enormous cauldron in the kitchen that we set up for doing this, for immersing things in boiling water. So if you have things which can be kosher, which are purely metal, or that have that the only part which really touches food is metal, that you want to kosher, bring them to Shari Tzedek on Sunday in the afternoon, and Joseph Marciano will be there and setting up. And you can come and you just dip it in and pull it out. And what people, you can use like a mesh bag, right? That allows the water to go, immerse it, pull it in. Now it's kosher. It takes, it happens very, very quickly. So that's a wonderful opportunity to come and kosher things very, very easily. And that means that because it's a very large cauldron that we have, you can bring stock pots and big soup pots and dump the whole thing in that boiling water and pull it out, and it's kosher. And that makes things very, very easy. Frying pans, we'll get to in just a moment. I'm sorry, Silas, did that answer your question? Is there more that needs to be done?
No, that's great. Thank you, Rabbi. Perfect.
You're welcome. Okay. I'll wait for 3 bubbles to rise. So yeah, the question about bubbles, the bubbles is not that to prove that it's boiling. The bubbles is that if we want the boiling water has to touch all areas of the inside of the pot, right? So if there's air bubbles, then not the entire area of the pot has not touched the water. So you have to wait. Yes, you want to, when you immerse things in the boiling water, you need to make sure that the entire thing is immersed, just like in the mikveh, right? You need to make sure that there's nothing, that you have to remove any labels or stickers, right? So that they're not, blocking the water from touching the entire surface area. Okay, frying pans. Frying pans don't cook with water. Generally speaking, when we cook with a frying pan, we're using direct conduction of heat from fire to metal to food, which means that they need to be kosher in the same manner with fire and not with water. So if you have a frying pan, it is possible to come with the blowtorch and do that. I don't recommend trying to kosher a frying pan, except unless it's entirely metal and doesn't have any plastic or other substance. Then you can put it in the oven when you do your oven cleaning, and that will kosher it. So if you have a cast iron pan, cast iron is wonderful pans, but if they've been used for chametz, so all of the season, all of that oil which has been absorbed into the metal is now chametz, right? If you've made pancakes, and so now you have so in order to get it all kosher, you need to burn all of that off, and the result of burning off the entire season from the pan is it can rust, or it can be damaged, and it's okay and it's kosher to do that, but it damages and lowers the quality of the pan. And I recommend that frying pans, you should get a new frying pan for Pesach. Leave it if you can afford it. It's not you don't need to get a fancy one, but just to have a frying pan. And rather than trying to kosher a frying pan, unless you have a stainless steel frying pan. If you have a stainless steel frying pan, you put it in the oven when you're koshering the oven, and it'll be fine, no problem. So that is a possibility. But other implements, most, unless they're used directly on the fire. Let's say I've got a barbecue grill, right? The grill place, the thing with the little bars that puts the grill lines on my hot dogs. That also it needs to be koshered with fire. Can't be koshered with water because it doesn't cook with water. other things that are used directly in fire need to be kosher with fire. So one way to do that is to do the oven. Let's talk about the oven. Any oven which has a self-cleaning cycle is the best way to kosher it, is to run the self-cleaning cycle. You have to beware of steam clean. There are many more modern ovens which have a self-cleaning steam cycle. The steam cycle really is not the same as a self-cleaning cycle. The self-cleaning cycle gets it very hot, up over 500-600 degrees, and it completely incinerates any organic material inside the oven, reduces it to carbon, and that makes it completely kosher for Pesach as well as kosher parv. So anytime that you want to kosher your oven, you can run the self-cleaning cycle if it has a genuine self-cleaning cycle. It usually takes about 3 hours or more, 3 or 5 hours. It gets very, very hot and it completely koshers it. Now, anything which is, again, purely metal, which goes through the self-cleaning cycle inside the oven, including the oven racks and your barbecue grate and anything else that's purely metal that you put through at that cycle will come out kosher parv. So if you have things that can handle that kind of heat, don't put aluminum in. Aluminum will melt. If you have an aluminum pan and you put it through, you'll end up with molten aluminum on the bottom of your oven. That you don't want to don't do that. But stainless steel, cast iron, copper, other metals which are purely, which are not aluminum, should be totally fine going through the self-cleaning cycle, and that completely koshers anything and everything. And so if you have like the plates of your if you have a gas range, right? You have all these pieces that can come off and be cleaned, and that can be come in contact with food if the food spills, or right, your soup boils over, or your pasta boils over, and now you've got this wonderful chametz absorbed in your in the cast iron parts of your gas range. You can remove them from there, put them in the oven, and run the cleaning cycle, and they are 100% kosher. And that's again, if anything that can survive that you put through, that's the best option. If you have an oven which doesn't have a self-cleaning cycle, right? So we need to do libum gumor. We need to make it complete as hotter than it's ever been. So what do we do? So first thing you need to do is make sure that there's no actual food stuff that's visible or you could feel, right? So to use an oven cleaner, a grease, right, the grease cutter, and then to really scrub it is going to be important. Again, we don't need it to be gone of any discoloration, but if you can feel it with your thumbnail, it's a substance, and it needs to be as well as you can, needs to be removed. And certainly if you can smear it, right, you need to clean it. If it's grease. So you need to do a thorough cleaning. And then what you're going to do is turn it on its very highest setting and leave it for at least an hour, right? As you want to get it to the point that it is as hot or hotter than it's ever been. If you have a broil, you put it on broil, you turn it all the way up to its very hottest setting, and it should be at that hottest setting for an hour, right? You have to not an hour total, but once it gets to that top peak temperature, leave it there for an hour, and then it's sort of considered that any chametz that has been in there has been burnt. Now, there are ovens like toaster ovens, these smaller ovens that are sort of self-contained. They're not built into a gas, a range. They're sort of a countertop oven. Those generally don't get that hot. They're a little bit problematic, because if you use a toaster oven for toasting and for cooking chametz, it doesn't really get that hot, so it can be a problem to kosher. And certainly a toaster, if you're actually toasting bread and bagels in a toaster, I would not recommend trying to kosher that. Better to take it, unplug it, put it in your cabinet with the stuff that you're selling, it's not, what are you going to toast on? You can toast your matzah, anyway. So I definitely think that toasters and toaster ovens are much more difficult to kosher. And if you can avoid it, it's again, the calculus of how much time is it worth and how much effort is it worth to kosher, it's probably not worth the time. Here we have somebody suggesting that copper may not be so good. Okay, I'm not familiar with copper cookware, but again, when you're putting things in the self-cleaning cycle, make sure that they're entirely metal. Applying baking soda paste to bake on stains, you need to wipe out your self-clean cycle. Very good. All right, helps. All these tricks are good. And again, anything that you're going to put in there to clean up that schmutz that is so vile, right, that you would never want to eat it, right? That if having known, right, that this surface had been cleaned with this oven cleaner, if the brownie batter was to drip down, would you just wipe it up and lick it? If it's so noxious a cleaner that you would not lick the brownie batter that fell on it, then it's not really chametz. Whatever's left is there. If the brownie batter falls on it afterwards, you have another problem. But again, the sense of if it's been cleaned in such a way that anything that's remaining there you would not want to eat because it's been made toxic, that's sufficient to say it's no longer chametz. Okay, so that's the oven. Stovetops. Stovetop surfaces, the grates that cover the entire stovetop. If you have a gas range, again, if you can take things off and put them through the self-clean cycle, that's the best case scenario. If you can't, so again, you need to clean them of any visible dirt, visible food rather, and then you're going to turn on the stove as hot as you can get it, and leave it that way for some time, at least, to make sure that it's fully as burnt, as you can get. Glass, electric. Let's just start electric stovetops that have that sort of spiral that turns red, right? The old-fashioned kind that you know what I'm talking about. They have this heating element that it's electric, but it gets hot. Turning it all the way up so that it gets red hot is in itself koshering it. So that's sufficient. If to kosher those things, any food that's on them is going to be burnt to the point that is no longer food, is no longer chametz. The area in between the burners is not really possible to kosher, especially because most if it's stainless steel, it can be koshered with fire. Not recommended. Now, what I suggest to people, even not for Pesach, right? Even not for Pesach, is if you have milchiks and fleischiks and you cook them on the same stove, right? A little piece of chicken soup falls, splashes out, and then your fettuccine Alfredo sauce splashes out, and now you got a properly trafe surface. So what I tell people is anything that falls onto the stove, you have to treat it as trafe. Yeah, and the same is going to apply for chametz. That area, especially if it's enamel, right? You can't really be koshered anyway. Is a problem. So if you have an enamel surface in between your burners, that's one of the few things that I recommend covering with foil. If you get heavy duty foil, it's even better. But to cover with foil and then put those burners back in place, right? Again, anything that falls, you shouldn't be eating off that surface anyway. But because it is a surface that has come in contact, presumably with hot chametz and cannot properly be koshered, that is one of the few things that once you've cleaned it, that I do recommend that you cover. If you have a glass cooktop, right, and that can be either that it gets hot underneath, or that you have one of these induction ones that uses an electrical current that only when the pot is on does it create heat. It's sufficient to clean them with your bleach or something, and to turn each burner to its highest setting, and that's sufficient. You don't need to cover it. You don't need to worry about it. That's very, very simple. So the stove is really not It shouldn't take long. It's not a difficult thing. If you've got real, food gook, that it should be clean, right? And if you have one of these things that it can fall inside and you can take it out, and any food that you can find, you need to remove, right? If there's genuine like food stuff that you can see that are crumbs or grease or something that's visible food, right? Again, imagine the dog, right? Would the dog be sniffing it and wanting to go eat it? If it is, you need to get rid of it, right? If it's something that the dog would be pursuing, it needs to be cleaned. And if necessary, right, you can spray some of your bleach or whatever into that area if you know that there's stuff there that you're unable to get rid of, right, for whatever reason. That is sort of the last ditch effort, is to poison it, right, with such that it's no longer food and therefore no longer chametz. Okay, the backsplash, right, and again, most people don't eat off the backsplash. So it's sufficient to clean it, and that's enough. Broiler, right? Again, the same thing. If it has a self-cleaning cycle, great. If it doesn't, done. We talked about the sink. Again, if you can leave the sink for 24 hours before pouring the hot water, that's ideal. Anything that really should be kosher needs to be kosher should be left for 24 hours before being kosher. That becomes difficult because you're still trying to, live and eat, and especially have kids, right? You can't not eat for 24 hours. But ideally, that is how it should be, how it should be done. Okay. Again, we've talked about using boiling water to kosher the sink. Most of us don't eat, right? We don't eat. I mean, it happens sometimes that we have food that's hot that touches the sink, and that will eventually take it out. Like when I'm pouring my pasta water, right? There could be a time when the water and the pasta are there, so that it's possible that if the sink were treif, right, that the treifness would come back into my pasta, and so that's why, for example, it's important to have, if you have the possibility of having two separate sinks for milchiks and fleishiks, and a divided sink is sufficient. To have the divided sink is ideal, because then you're not going to be getting milchik and fleishik together. But certainly for Pesach, you should kosher the sink in that manner. There are other ways to kosher the sink. Another method is if you can plug it, with a plug, and fill it up, and then boil that water. There are immersible heating elements. That I don't know. I haven't seen them so much here, but in Israel they have them that you can sort of plug in and put it in your pot, and it'll boil the water in your pot, and it'll do the same in your sink. That's one method. Or to pour boiling water, or hot water from the kettle, and then take a hot rock and put it in so it'll boil it. That's another way to actually boil water in your sink, and that makes everything completely kosher as well. Again, that might not be easier, but it might be, depending on your sink and the arrangement and what kind of tools you have. Okay. Microwave. Here we go. But let's do refrigerator and freezer. Again, hot food generally doesn't sit directly on the surfaces of your refrigerator or freezer. That being the case, it's sufficient to wipe everything down with your Clorox or bleach, and then it's sufficient. You don't need to go with hot water into this. If there are people who like to keep flour or other chametz staples in the freezer, and if they've spilled, you need to clean them, and that could mean that, again, it depends on each person's freezer and how things look. But if you know that you keep flour in the freezer, appropriate, then you should at least wipe down the entire surface. And if there's ice covering the inside of your freezer, you need to thaw it. Right? That if it's if you get some freezers you get this sort of ice that builds up right around the surfaces. If you have that and there might be chametz inside of that ice, it's a good idea to thaw the freezer, and wipe everything down with bleach, and that's sufficient. But the surfaces should be cleaned so that there's not any foodstuffs that remain. The microwave. Microwaves, there's a whole question about whether microwaves can be kashered in general and kasher for Pesach. The general attitude in the modern Orthodox community is that they are kasherable because the microwave doesn't cook with heat. The only heat in the microwave comes from the food, right? It's not that there's heat that builds up. It doesn't cook with heat. It cooks with the microwaves, these radiation that comes, and then the molecules of the food are jiggled. They're vibrated by these microwaves, and that vibration causes heat, but the only heat comes from the food. So there isn't any, it doesn't fill itself, it doesn't get hot in the same way, which makes it very easy to kasher, because again, you only need to kasher it in the way that it was made treif or chametz. So it needs to be cleaned, right? That there should be no visible food. And so you need to thoroughly clean it. And again, you should wipe it with your bleach. But then what you do is you should take either a new or a parv or a paper cup, fill it with water and put it in for 5 minutes, and the water will boil in a paper cup as well, or in whatever cup that you have it. But obviously you can't use a chametz cup, right? Because you're not helping anything, right? So your regular coffee mug is not such a good thing. But if you take a paper cup or a new cup or a glass that you don't use hot, whatever you can use, fill it with water, put it in for 5 minutes. The water will boil. That steam will kasher the inside of the microwave, and that's sufficient. Once again, you should leave the microwave unused for 24 hours before doing this, but that's sufficient. We have a question about Keurig coffee machines. This is a very good question. The issue with the Keurig coffee machines is you need to know if there's ever been chametz used. Coffee that's just coffee, and there's no flavors and there's no anything is not kosher, is not chametz, right? And if the only thing that's been in it is coffee. But the problem what you have is when you have something like a hazelnut coffee, and that hazelnut flavor, right, may have chametz in it, or any of these flavored coffees, your French vanilla, whatever, it may have something like soy lecithin. Soy is kidneyot, but still we want to get rid of it. Again, there are reusable Keurig cups, right, where you can get this. It's a little cup, right, that you can fill with coffee grounds yourself, and then you can put it in. Now, some Keurig machines won't run if there isn't a cup in it, right? You can't run it empty. If you can, so that's one way to do it, right? Now, again, the inside is plastic, and most people say plastic can't be kasher. On the other hand, that's the way that it would have been made treif, so it's not 100%. If you can be certain that there was never any flavored coffee, and that all of your coffee that's been in the Keurig machine is pure coffee with no added ingredients, so then I don't think it needs to be kasher. In the same way that your hot water urn, if all that ever goes in there is hot water, it doesn't need to be kasher for Pesach, even if the inside is plastic, right? Because what's been in there is only water, so the water is not chametz. Okay, dishwasher. Dishwasher. Boy, oh boy, right? The dishwasher is involved in kashering the dishwasher are noted in chapter 9, right? But that's, again, when we're talking about kashering dishwashers. Dishwasher uses enameled walls that cannot be kasher. The inside, if it's enamel, is a problem. Enamel is essentially has the same halacha as pottery, right? It's it is difficult. Now, there are also stainless steel dishwashers and many crevices and hollows that are inaccessible, cannot be cleaned. I don't think that that's really a problem. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein paskined in general that you can kasher a stainless steel interior dishwasher. If you can kasher it in general, so you can kasher it for Pesach. The difficulty comes is if you have plastic, if the racks on the inside are plastic, now you have a problem, because if we say the plastic cannot be kasher, so you would need to get replacement racks for Pesach. Or if there's metal racks, you can kasher them, as normal. So how do you kasher a dishwasher? The idea, once again, is that you want to get it hotter than it's ever been while it had chametz in it. There are people who say it's enough to just run it. Some people say 3 times on its highest setting. I don't think that that's the case. I think that you're just recycling the chametz that's already absorbed in it, and you need to get it hotter. So how Rav Moshe Feinstein says that it needs to be hotter than it's ever been, and how do you do that? You could take a rock or a brick or something significant, a metallic that has significant mass, like a new or kasher cast iron pan, or something like a hammer that's all metal, or a rock. You can take a rock from outside in the garden. You take it, you put it on your gas range, you get it nice and hot, and then directly in the fire. So you've got this very, very hot rock. You run your dishwasher on its hottest cycle, and in the hottest part, in the hottest stage of the cycle, right, when it's doing the hot wash, you open it up, you put your hot rock in, and you close it again, and at that point, the extra heat from that hot rock will heat up the water inside the dishwasher to hotter than it's ever been. You'll see if you do that it'll emit a huge amount of steam. It'll right. It makes a great deal of steam, and that kashers it. That kashers it. There is a suggestion that even if there are plastic parts, if you repeat that process 3 times, that it's sufficient, even if it's plastic and enamel. So there is that thing, and if you want to do that, that is certainly before you to do. And if it's not, so it may be easier to simply call the dishwasher chametz. But it's not terribly difficult. I believe you can even find on YouTube an instructional video of how to kasher your dishwasher. So okay, Lemuel says, our dishwasher has a self-cleaning mode. Is that okay to kasher? No, the self-cleaning mode isn't really, it's not the same as a self-cleaner on an oven, right? The self-cleaner on an oven gets it really, really hot. The self-cleaning mode is just sort of rinsing things. It allows it to rinse, but the hot water that's, if it's chametz already, it's going to be, it's still going to have chametz. You're just going to wash that chametz flavored water throughout the whole thing. So the self-cleaning cycle on the dishwasher is not sufficient to kasher it in the same way that it is. You throw in a pot of boiling water as the washer's running. That right? You can do, that's the same idea as the hot rock, right? That there's a filter that's filled with all this food. The filter needs to be replaced too. No, the filter does need to be removed and cleaned. And if possible, if it's metal, or even if it's not metal, even if it's plastic, and you're relying on this, 3 times to kasher it, you should take that thing out, clean it, and perhaps kasher it by immersing it in boiling water. If there's a filter that is the place that directly touches the food. Okay, I want to see kashering. There you go. You see? So you see here you have how to kasher dishwashers and electric ranges by OU Kosher. Can't ask for better than that. Okay, so these things exist. You can find them on YouTube, and it's not entirely impossible. It just needs to be done correctly. But this is all based on the psak of Rav Moshe Feinstein. So you are in very good hands, in koshering your. There is no reason to question the legitimacy of koshering your dishwasher for Pesach. That's the basic. Textiles. Anything which is a textile. Generally, we don't eat hot food directly off of textiles, right? If therefore, laundry cycle, putting your dishwasher or your cloth napkins through the washing machine and laundering them is perfectly sufficient. You can call them kosher for Pesach. You should not have them starched, right? If you take them to the cleaners and get them starched, you have a whole other problem because the starch that they're using is probably chametz, right? So don't get, and the same is true with anything. If you're taking it to the cleaners before Pesach, don't get things starched. Don't get your shirt starched or your jackets or whatever else, because the starch is very likely to be chametz. It's made from food products, byproducts. So, but running anything through your home washing cycle is perfectly sufficient to kosher, and you can use the same tablecloths that you've been using with your challah. You can use on the table for Pesach if they've been laundered. That's not a problem. Same is true with your towels. Towels, hand towels, anything that's of textile is sufficient to run it through the washing machine, and that's enough. Barbecue grill, if it is extremely difficult to kosher a barbecue grill. It's true. It's very, very difficult. It's not impossible. And the way to do it, if you want to do it, is if you have a gas grill, is fill it up with wood and let it make it an inferno, and let that wood fire come and touch everything, and then all of the metal surfaces should turn white, right? They become sort of all of the grease that's there gets completely reduced to carbon, and it turns white, and then once that whiteness has gone over the entire surface area of the metal parts, so it's considered kosher. So it can be done if it's really necessary. We actually had we had a gas grill that we saved for Pesach. There was just we used it only on Pesach. Electric grill like the George Foreman certainly cannot be koshered. Don't try. The blech, if you have a Shabbos plata that you use for Shabbat, again, we generally don't eat directly off of it, but sometimes we do, or you can put food on it, like challahs right on the blech. So if you're going to use it, you should clean it with bleach and then put foil over it and cover your plata on Pesach, and keep it covered anytime you're using it on Pesach. But it's perfectly fine to use the same Shabbat plata on Pesach that you use all year, as long as it's covered. A blender. Blender is made of plastic or glass. Neither can be kosher generally for Pesach. If you have an all metal blender, it can be kosher with hagala. Right, you can put it. Hagala is the boiling water. You can immerse if it's all made out of metal. Like these industrial blenders are. Handheld immersible blenders should not be used for Pesach, or you could get a separate one for Pesach. The broom. Some people have a sense of wanting to not, to get a new broom, right? Throw away your broom and get a new broom. If you don't have a very fancy, like expensive broom, it's a good idea to just throw it away, get a new broom. Once a year is not a big deal. If you have a vacuum cleaner that you use during the year, before Pesach, you should empty out the vacuum. If you have the central vacuum cleaner, for some people in the house that has the central vacuum, you should dump that because there's probably chametz in there, and you just want to get rid of it. And I'm not suspicious that anybody's going to go into your vacuum bag to eat anything. Nevertheless, you should be clear to change the bag or empty the container of the vacuum cleaner. Can openers, if you can clean it thoroughly and do hagala, that's fine. It's not not difficult to get a separate one. Candlesticks need to be cleaned. Generally, we don't eat them, and they're not used with food, so it's not really a problem. If you use them with oil that's not olive oil, right? If you're using safflower or they're kitniot, some people get persnickety about it. Sufficient to clean them that as you would. They don't have to be, they're not really food, and you're not using them with any food. Coffee maker, again, if it's used with exclusively for pure unflavored coffee, here says non-decaffeinated, essentially kosher for Pesach. The question about decaffeination is how do they do it and with what materials, and maybe decaffeinated it should be considered the same as like flavored. Cooling rack may be thoroughly cleaned or kosher with Hagala. Corkscrew, you can use the same corkscrew. Crock pot cannot be kosher for Pesach. If you want to use if you can get a new insert, right, just a new crock, and you can use a new crock for Pesach, that's sufficient. But because crock pot is essentially ceramic, it cannot be kosher, and you should not use the same crock pot during Pesach that you would use during the year. However, the heating element can be used. So if you just have if you just get a new insert, that's fine. Cutting boards, usually cuts and crevices are difficult to clean. It should not be kosher for Pesach. Use the one way that I suggested that you could is if you sand it to the point that you can no longer see those crevices. Right? If the cut marks have been sanded out, that's perfectly fine. That's very difficult to do by hand. But if you have a belt sander or a spinny sander, I don't know what they're called, but it doesn't take very long if you've got the right tools, and it can be done. Dentures, the remainder of the mouth should be cleaned, after each chametz. But again, you don't need to get special braces or anything like that for Pesach. You should get, people like to have kosher for Pesach soap. If you use bar soap in any of your sinks or in your bathtub, right? You use a soap that you're going to have your hands on at a certain point. You should just get a new bar of soap for Pesach and not use one that your hands have touched that could have absorbed other stuff. Drinking glasses, generally Ashkenazi don't kasher glass, and it should get new cups. For people who are Sephardi, there's a lot more leniency there, but in general, it's appropriate to have separate vessels for Pesach. Knife sharpeners. The knife sharpeners, that's a wonderful question. There are different kinds of knife sharpeners. Stones that you're going to use to kasher that are stone is sufficient, because the stone generally doesn't handle food at all. It's sufficient to just wash the stone, to rinse it off, and then you can sharpen your knife. If you want to knives is a good question. Thank you for bringing that up. Knives can be kosher because they're the part that is generally engaging with food is the metal part. So even if they have a plastic or wooden handle, we generally do allow knives to be kosher. The proper way to kosher a knife is, if it can be sharpened, is to first sharpen it and then to do hagala, right? To immerse it in the boiling water. If it is a serrated knife that cannot be sharpened, it's sufficient to do hagala. But if it can be sharpened, it's appropriate to sharpen it first and then to do hagala. That sort of resets the surface. Flatware, silverware can be kosher if it's pure metal, right? If it has handles that are generally, we don't like to kosher them because it's very normal, right, that the plastic handle will come into contact with food. Especially if you have kids. So plastic or wooden handled flatware should not be used, should not be kosher for Pesach. But if you have silverware or steel flatware, perfectly fine to kosher. It can be all done hagala. You can pour it in that big cauldron at shul, or boil up a kosher for Pesach pot and immerse them, and it's totally fine. Food processor, I do not recommend trying to kosher a food processor. We just bought another one what we tend to do is buy a new food processor every year for Pesach, and just to have it, because we, rather than having a really good one, we just get, that's what we tend to do. But if you have a good food processor, because it's plastic, and it's much better to have a separate food processor that you can save just for Pesach. Frying pans, we talked about. Graters, it's very difficult to clean it properly. It can be a metal grater thoroughly, can be kashered, either by libun or by immersion in hot water. Question again is how much time is it worth to make sure it's thoroughly clean, and would it be easier to just get a new one, set it aside and get a new one. Salt and pepper shakers. Salt and pepper shakers, you really should not use, try to kasher for Pesach. The reason is like this: when I'm shaking my salt over my pot of chicken soup with noodles, right? The steam that's coming up is gonna sort of contaminate my salt shaker. So generally, it's recommended that you set aside your salt and pepper shakers or grinders and get new ones for Pesach rather than trying to kasher them. If you want to take it completely, disassemble it, empty it out, and do hagala and immerse it in the boiling water, that's sufficient. Hot water urn does not need to be kashered so long as the only thing in it is hot water. And same as, a juicer. Especially if you use anything that's for sure chametz, it can be thoroughly cleaned and used on Pesach because it's generally is used cold, and it's not generally, we don't juice grains, right? Barley grass and wheat grass are not chametz, even if you were doing that. But so it's not a problem generally to use. Usually Kiddush cup should be, if you have a metal Kiddush cup, you can do hagala and it's not a problem. If you have a crystal Kiddush cup, again, it's a little bit more complicated. A glass or a crystal Kiddush cup, it needs to be very, very thoroughly cleaned, and ideally, if you can do hagala, that's fine, but you certainly don't want to break it. But to be thoroughly clean it with your bleachers, with something like that, it'd be sufficient, because generally people don't drink hot chametz. You don't drink hot chametz out of your Kiddush cup, so it's not a problem. Measuring cups, only if they're used only for dry, cold foods, can be washed, and used for Pesach. If you can do hagala, that's great. Oven mitts. If you've got textile oven mitts, they can go through the wash. That's totally fine. If they're plastic, you get these sort of rubbery silicone ones. Those are a little more problematic because if they've come into contact with hot chametz, they're actually chametz-dik. So if you have one that is silicone or rubber, you should probably get a new one for Pesach. Potato peeler, says usually wash with chametz is difficult to clean, but if you can, it's okay to do hagala. We talked about this. Pepper peeler pots. Rings. If you know that you've handled, you've made challah with your ring on, good idea to at least thoroughly clean it. We don't generally eat hot food off of our jewelry, so it's not really a problem. But you should make sure certainly that take it off and make sure that it's clean and that you don't have any visible food stuck to any of your jewelry. Ceramics you cannot kosher is generally correct. We treat ceramic as not kosherable. Okay. Any questions? I know that there probably are a lot of questions and things, but I want to open it up, for anything that needs to be asked. Nobody. Wow. Okay.
There, Rabbi, I found on the Chabad website here a good little rundown of all the days leading up to Pesach and through Pesach, and when's the Yom Tov and when's not the Yom Tov. Is that worth sharing in the chat? Or is
you can share it, Yom Tov, when's Yom Tov, when's not Yom Tov is important stuff. I guess that's not really what this class has been about.
Right.
But if you have questions about when is Yom Tov, yeah, we're definitely worth making sure that you know, it'll be next Wednesday night, Thursday and Friday are Yom Tov. It goes directly into Shabbos. There's no window in between Yom Tov and Shabbos. So therefore you need to make sure that you have a candle burning throughout Yom Tov so that you can light your Shabbos candles, on Friday afternoon, right? And you need to make an Eruv Tavshilin. If there's any question about how to do that, you can call me, ask, or you can just look it up. And Eruv Tavshilin is what allows us to cook for Shabbat on Yom Tov. Generally speaking, on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to cook. You're not allowed to prepare for after Yom Tov, right? Which would include cooking. But because it's going directly into Shabbat, so there is a way that the rabbis established you can begin the process of preparing for Shabbat before Yom Tov and continue to prepare for Shabbat over Yom Tov. That's called an Eruv Tavshilin, which means combining your cookings, right? You're sort of combining all the acts of cooking that you're going to need to do for Shabbat. And you can check that out. There's plenty of information on how to do that. It's in your Sidur, how to make an Eruv Tavshilin. Next Sunday, for those who are able to come, we'll have the Hagala. You can come and immerse things in the boiling water at Shul. We have the whole program about preparing the Seder in a box. There's a lot of people that are dependent on the Seder in the box to make a kosher for Pesach Seder, and they can help with that. And we'll have matzah baking. I have shmura flour from the Skver Hasidim in upstate New York, and we'll be making handmade shmura matzah. It takes less than 18 minutes. You're welcome to come through. I'll be doing that all afternoon from 12 until 5 on next Sunday. I highly recommend, if you've never made your own matzah, to come and participate, and you can take home a matzah for your Seder. There's nothing like homemade matzah that you yourself have made. And then next week's practical halacha class, we'll be talking about how to abridge the Seder and still fulfill all the commandments and the mitzvot that are involved. Not every word in the Haggadah needs to be said in order to fulfill the mitzvot, and learning to distill the Seder to its essence and fulfill the obligations therein, while making it accessible to the whole family and to people that may not be sensitive, in the right ways to get a whole lot out of the whole Haggadah. So we can talk about how to do that best. And if you don't have a Seder and would like to be set up for one, please be in contact with myself or with Ahava. And you can also register on the Shaarei Tzedek website for the second Seder, which Ahava and I will be leading at Shaarei Tzedek. That'll be a turbo Seder. It's quite nice. We did it last year. We've done this for the last number of years to do the second Seder we do the whole thing without skipping anything, but we just do it quickly. And it's quite nice, and I certainly recommend it if you've had a long Seder the first night, to do a power Seder, turbo Seder the second night it's a very nice time. We sing and we have a great time. So really encourage everybody to make the most of the holiday, and if you need anything, to be in touch with Ahava and I. I wish you all a wonderful week.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shavua
Thank you
tov.
so much. Shavua Tov. Thank you.